That night, that's when the scary things started happening to me. I had just landed a new job in a small, charming town nestled deep in the woods. The town of Cedarville seemed like the perfect place to start fresh, with its picturesque streets lined with old Victorian houses and the scent of pine lingering in the air. I was eager to find a place to live, and the search led me to a quaint little street called Cedar Street, famous for its tree-lined paths and serene atmosphere. I found an advertisement for a room for rent in a house on Cedar Street. The rent was surprisingly affordable, almost too good to be true. The house itself, an old Victorian with ivy climbing up its sides and a large oak tree in the front yard, had an eerie charm that intrigued me. I contacted the landlord, an elderly woman named Mrs. Abernathy, who seemed eager to rent out the room. When I arrived to view the room, Mrs. Abernathy greeted me with a warm smile. She was a petite woman with silver hair and a gentle demeanor, though something about her eyes seemed to hold a hidden sadness. She showed me around the house, her soft voice guiding me through the maze of rooms filled with antique furniture and dusty portraits. The room available for rent was on the second floor, at the end of a long, narrow hallway. As we approached the door, I noticed a faint chill in the air. Mrs. Abernathy hesitated before opening the door, her hand trembling slightly. She turned to me and said, "This room has been empty for quite some time. The previous tenants, well, they didn't stay for long." I felt a shiver run down my spine, but dismissed it as nerves. The room itself was quaint, with a large window overlooking the front yard and a fireplace that added a cozy touch. I agreed to take the room and moved in the next day. The first few nights were uneventful. I settled into my new routine, exploring the town during the day and enjoying the peace and quiet of the house in the evenings. However, it wasn't long before strange things started to happen. On the fourth night, I was awoken by a soft, whispering sound. At first, I thought it was the wind rustling through the trees outside, but as I listened more closely, I realized the whispers were coming from within the house. They were faint, almost inaudible, but unmistakably human. I lay in bed, my heart pounding, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. Eventually, the whispers faded away, and I fell back into a restless sleep. The next morning, I mentioned the whispers to Mrs. Abernathy. She looked at me with a knowing expression and simply said, "This house has a history. Some say it's haunted, but I've never seen anything myself." Her words did little to ease my growing unease. Over the next few days, the whispers became more frequent. They seemed to follow me wherever I went in the house, growing louder at night. I tried to ignore them, convincing myself they were just the creaks and groans of an old house settling. But deep down, I knew there was something more. One night, as I lay in bed, the whispers grew louder and more urgent. I sat up, straining to make out the words. They were indistinct, a jumbled murmur that sent chills down my spine. I decided to get up and investigate. I grabbed a flashlight and cautiously made my way down the hallway, following the sound of the whispers. The sound led me to a door at the end of the hallway, a door I hadn't noticed before. It was slightly ajar, and as I approached, I could see a faint light flickering inside. My heart raced as I pushed the door open, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into the darkness. I hesitated, every instinct telling me to turn back, but the whispers seemed to call me, drawing me down the stairs. I descended slowly, the wooden steps creaking under my weight. The air grew colder and heavier with each step, and the whispers became louder, echoing off the walls. At the bottom of the stairs, I found myself in a small, dimly lit room. The walls were lined with old shelves filled with dusty books and strange artifacts. In the center of the room stood a large, ornate mirror, its surface covered in a thick layer of dust. The whispers seemed to be coming from the mirror, their voices growing more frantic. I approached the mirror, my hand trembling as I reached out to wipe away the dust. As I did, I caught a glimpse of my reflection, and my blood ran cold. Staring back at me was not my own reflection, but that of a young woman with hollow eyes and a look of sheer terror on her face. Her lips moved, but no sound came out, as if she were trying to scream but couldn't. I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, filling the room with their eerie chorus. I turned to flee, but the door slammed shut behind me, trapping me in the room. Panic set in as I pounded on the door, desperate to escape. Suddenly, the whispers stopped. The room fell silent, the air heavy with an oppressive stillness. I turned back to the mirror, and to my horror, the woman was gone. In her place was my own reflection, but something was different. My eyes were wide with fear, my face pale and drawn. I could see the terror etched into every line of my features. And then I heard it, a faint voice, barely more than a whisper. "Help me," it said. "Please help me." The voice was coming from the mirror, but it wasn't the woman this time. It was my own voice, echoing back at me from the depths of the mirror. I stumbled back, my mind reeling. Was I going mad? Had I imagined the whole thing? I didn't know what to believe anymore. All I knew was that I had to get out of that house. I ran up the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest, and burst through the door. I didn't stop until I was outside, gasping for breath in the cool night air. The house loomed behind me, its dark windows like empty eyes watching my every move. I didn't go back to the house that night. Instead, I drove to the nearest hotel and checked in, my mind racing with the events of the night. I spent the next few days looking for a new place to live, desperate to put the house on Cedar Street behind me. But the whispers stayed with me. Even in the hotel, I could hear them at night, faint and distant, calling to me from the darkness. I knew I had to find out more about the house, about the mirror, and the woman trapped inside. I went to the town library and started researching the history of the house. What I found chilled me to the bone. The house had once belonged to a wealthy family, the Burtons, who had lived there for generations. But tragedy had struck the family in the late 1800s, when their youngest daughter, Eliza, had disappeared without a trace. The family had searched for her for years, but she was never found. Some said she had run away. Others whispered that she had met a darker fate. As I dug deeper, I found a connection to the mirror. It had been a gift to Eliza from her grandmother, a family heirloom passed down through the generations. After Eliza's disappearance, the mirror was moved to the basement, where it had remained ever since. Some believed it was cursed, a portal to another world where Eliza was trapped. I knew I had to go back to the house, to the mirror, and try to find a way to free Eliza. That night, I returned to Cedar Street, my heart heavy with dread. The house loomed before me, dark and silent, as if it were waiting for me. I made my way down to the basement, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The room was just as I had left it, the mirror standing ominously in the center. I approached it, my reflection staring back at me with wide, fearful eyes. "Eliza," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Are you there?" For a moment there was nothing but silence. Then slowly, a figure began to take shape in the mirror. It was Eliza, her eyes hollow and filled with despair. She looked at me, her lips moving silently, pleading for help. I didn't know what to do. How could I free her? The whispers began again, filling the room with their eerie chorus. They seemed to be guiding me, urging me to do something, but I couldn't understand what. Then it came to me. The mirror. It was the key. I had to break it. I picked up a heavy book from one of the shelves, and with all my strength smashed it against the mirror. The glass shattered, shards flying everywhere. The whispers stopped abruptly, and the room fell silent. I looked at the broken pieces of the mirror, my reflection fractured into 1,000 pieces. But there was no sign of Eliza. She was gone. I left the house that night, my mind numb with exhaustion. I didn't know if I had freed Eliza or if I had just condemned her to a different kind of prison. All I knew was that the whispers had stopped, and the house on Cedar Street was no longer haunted by their eerie presence. But sometimes late at night, I still hear them, faint and distant, calling to me from the depths of the darkness. And I wonder if Eliza is still out there, waiting to be freed from her prison in the mirror. I moved out of Cedarville shortly after that night, leaving the house on Cedar Street behind. But the memory of that night stayed with me, a dark shadow that haunted my dreams. I tried to forget, to move on with my life, but the whispers were always there, lurking in the back of my mind. Years later, I received a letter from Mrs. Abernathy. She had passed away, and the house on Cedar Street was being sold. The letter contained a single photograph, an old faded picture of a young woman standing in front of the house. It was Eliza, her eyes filled with a sadness that seemed to reach out from the past. I never went back to Cedarville, But sometimes when the nights are long and the whispers grow louder, I wonder if the house on Cedar Street still holds its secrets. And I wonder if Eliza is still waiting for someone to come and set her free.